Before Harry Potter ever stepped foot in Hogwarts, and even before Voldemort killed his parents, there was a whole other story. One of dark wizards, ancient secrets, and magical wars. This is everything that came before. So settle in, brace yourselves, and let's wind back the clock on wizarding history. Also, a reminder that this is a compilation-style video, so please be aware of some varied audio levels and inconsistent numbering. Let's dive in. Herpa the Foul creates the first Horcrux, ancient Greece. Voldemort is commonly associated with Horcruxes, as he was successfully able to produce so many. But what a lot of people don't realize is that a wizard by the name of Herpa the Foul did it first. Herpa was an ancient dark wizard that hailed from Greece, and though we don't have an exact date for when he walked the earth, we do know that it was in ancient Greece, a period of Greek history that lasted from the Greek Dark Ages, 1050 to 750 BC, to the end of antiquity, AD 600. This would put his creation of the first ever Horcrux as one of the earliest moments in known wizarding history. And although Herpa only created one Horcrux, a seemingly small feat when compared with Voldemort's 7, what we have to be mindful of is the fact that he was the first to do it. He set the stage and figured out that it was possible. Over the course of history, J.K. Rowling has mentioned that many witches and wizards had tried to create one, but none succeeded or survived. Wizards would have been looking for ways to do exactly what Voldemort did for years, and some of the ways they would have tried would have killed them. So I imagine it, well, they're huge parallels. Splitting the atom would be a very good parallel in our world. I do imagine that other people are going to have tried. I think it would be naive not to think that people have been trying for a long time, and thought they succeeded and hadn't, or else maimed themselves or killed themselves in the attempt. It's such a dangerous thing to do. Creating a Horcrux was such a sinister process that even a book known as Magique Most Evil, a book providing detailed and advanced insights into the dark arts, would not provide the reader with any information on it. Of the Horcrux, wickedest of magical inventions, we shall not speak nor give direction. In fact, only one book did, and that book is known as Secrets of the Darkest Art, as revealed by Hermione in the Deathly Hallows. This is the one that gives explicit instructions on how to make a Horcrux, Secrets of the Darkest Art. It's a horrible book, really awful, full of evil magic. Herpa the Foul is perhaps one of the darkest wizards to have ever lived, a man that single-handedly pioneered two of the darkest magical techniques known to wizard kind. Because of this, he has secured his place in wizarding history. Ollivanders is established, approximately 382 BC. The first wand-making shops were known to date back to the establishment of Ollivander's wand shop in 382 BC. The original Ollivander, the ancestor of Garrick Ollivander, was thought to have come from a Mediterranean country in Roman times and set up a stall in what would eventually become Diagon Alley. The etymology of the name Ollivander is said to literally mean he who owns the olive wand, which is a very fitting name and further points to him coming from a Mediterranean country where olive trees would grow natively. Considered to be a complex and mysterious branch of magic, wand making refers to a wand maker using wand cores and woods to construct wands for witches and wizards. The profession dates back many centuries, and the earliest known wand makers were said to have been druids. A druid was considered to be, in Celtic times, a member of the learned and priestly class. Druids considered anything with a woody stem to be a tree, which led to them producing wands out of things like vine, a tradition followed by wand maker Garrick Ollivander in the 20th century. Though druids were skilled at their craft, at this stage in history, it was still totally normal for a customer of a wand shop to bring their own core with them, a tradition that has basically fallen off in more recent times. The Ollivander family revolutionized wand making when they publicly forsook the traditional wand making process, which previously had witches and wizards procure their own wand core. Ollivander believed that this process produced wands that were inferior in quality and performance, which led to the family procuring all wand components for future customers. Ollivander researched the best wand cores and would always find the best wand wood to complement it, and where the purchaser would previously select a wand of their choosing, he began the tradition of having the wand choose the wizard. Founding of Hogwarts, 10th century. This might shock you when I say this, but there was a time in wizarding history when Hogwarts didn't exist. That means no houses, no sorting hat, and no castle. But fortunately, thanks to 4 10th century witches and wizards, who had, in the Sorting Hat's own words, the self-same yearning to make the world's best magic school, the school eventually made its way into existence. These founders were Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Salazar Slytherin, and Helga Hufflepuff. Hogwarts, which was founded in the late 10th century, was built in a secret location in the Scottish Highlands, a place that is never actually fully revealed. This secrecy was necessary because the 10th century was a dangerous time for witches and wizards, who faced constant persecution from muggles. Muggles, deeply fearful of magic, were often hostile to anything they didn't understand, and so to ensure the safety of the students, staff, and the school itself, powerful enchantments were cast over Hogwarts, concealing it from the eyes of muggles. The name Hogwarts actually came from founder Rowena Ravenclaw, who had a dream where a warty hog led her to a cliff by a lake. It's also been speculated that this is how they chose the location for the school as well. After its establishment, like with any institution, a crest was formed for Hogwarts. Emblazoned upon the school crest are the words Draco dormien nanquam titilandus, which roughly translates to "Never tickle a sleeping dragon." And since that day in 993 AD, Hogwarts has continued to serve as the cornerstone of magical education in Britain, shaping the lives of young witches and wizards for over a millennium. Wars, rebellions, and dark wizards have come and gone, but Hogwarts has always stood strong, making it a beacon of hope when darkness seeps in. Salazar Slytherin leaves Hogwarts and creates the Chamber of Secrets, 10th century. After Hogwarts School opened its doors, there was a short-lived but harmonious time, when the founders' friendships were intact and things flowed seamlessly. However, it didn't take long for Salazar Slytherin to start butting heads with his fellow founders. While his dark wizarding ways didn't initially bother Godric, Helga, or Rowena, his anti-muggle rhetoric, however right it might have been at the time, didn't sit well with the others. And eventually, driven by frustration, Slytherin issued an ultimatum to the other founders. He could no longer envision a future for the school if it continued accepting Muggle-born students. Despite having significant control over his own house and the Sorting Hat assisting him in selecting only purebloods for Slytherin, it just wasn't enough for him. Salazar wanted every house at Hogwarts to admit only pureblood wizards, believing they were the true heirs of magical lineage. And as tensions grew, the issue eventually reached a breaking point. Slytherin found himself at odds with his fellow founders, who firmly believed that Muggle-born witches and wizards were just as valuable as those of pure blood. They rejected his increasingly rigid and prejudiced views, refusing to limit Hogwarts admissions based on bloodline. Even Salazar's oldest friend, dear Godric, rebuked Slytherin for his intolerance. And so, in the end, Salazar felt that he was forced to abandon Hogwarts, the very school that he had spent so many years helping to form. But he didn't leave the school unblemished. In the years to come, the Sorting Hat would continue to select students based on Salazar's preferences. And there was one more stain Slytherin left behind. In the depths of Hogwarts, only accessible by hidden pathways, the Dark Wizard had created the Chamber of Secrets, a secret chamber complete with a statue of his likeness. Then, as Harry drew level with the last pair of pillars, a statue high as the chamber itself loomed into view, standing against the back wall. It was ancient and monkeyish, with a long, thin beard that fell almost to the bottom of the wizard's sweeping stone robes, where 2 enormous grey feet stood on the smooth chamber floor. But that wasn't the only thing in the chamber. Slytherin also placed a giant venomous basilisk, one that rivaled the murderous beast that Herpo perfected in a prior age. Salazar hoped that one of his heirs would take up his charge to rid the world of Muggle-born wizards with the aid of his serpent. His dreams would be realized 1,000 years later when Tom Riddle accessed the chamber and attacked his non-pureblood classmates. Unfortunately, not much is known about the period after Salazar left Hogwarts, but many believe that he died just a short period after creating the Chamber of Secrets. Invention of Quidditch, 11th century. Quidditch is without a doubt the most popular and well-known sport played by witches and wizards in the wizarding world, and it's also, as you may have guessed or probably already know, extremely magical in nature, as the whole game revolves around various balls that fly about of their own volition and is played while riding around on broomsticks. Quidditch is played by 2 teams of 7 on a pitch typically set up on a deserted moor or field, far from the view of muggles. Each team has 3 chasers, 2 beaters, 1 keeper, and 1 seeker. The game uses 4 balls, a 12-inch red quaffle for scoring, 2 10-inch iron bludgers to disrupt players, and a small golden snitch with wings. Both teams have 3 goalposts guarded by the keeper, while chasers aim to score using the quaffle. Beaters protect teammates by deflecting bludgers, and the Seeker's sole task is to catch the Golden Snitch, earning 150 points and ending the match. In the Wizarding community, the game is a hit. But what you probably didn't know is that Quidditch has been around for nearly as long as Hogwarts, with origins as early as the 11th century, and it has certainly evolved over time. The first known sighting of Quidditch was by a witch who lived in Quidditch Marsh in the 1000s called Gertie Kettle. Gertie recorded being rather bothered by a nearby broomstick game in her diary, describing what is believed to have been a primitive form of Quidditch, including a rudimentary quaffle, bludgers, and goals. The next account of the game didn't come for another 100 years, when a Yorkshire wizard named Goodwin Neen described the game in a letter he wrote to his Norwegian cousin. Goodwin's description of Quidditch signifies several key things. One, his location in Yorkshire suggests that 100 years after Gertie first saw the game being played in Quidditch Marsh, Quidditch had spread across England. And two, the equipment and game itself had evolved, as Goodwin calls the game itself Quidditch with a K, and also used the terms bludder and catcher, which can presumably be forms of the modern-day bludger and chaser. In his letter, Goodwin also makes note of new scoring barrels and describes there being 3 at each end of the field, all of which were up on stilts. From later accounts given by various sources, we know that by the 1200s, Quidditch had continued to evolve, with new terminology and additions to the game cropping up like quaffle, keepers, goal baskets, and quadditch, with a C. One of the biggest changes to the game, however, didn't take place until the middle of the 13th century, when the Golden Snitch was eventually added to the game. Creation of the Deathly Hallows, 11th century. The legend of the Deathly Hallows is one of the most well-known stories in the wizarding world. Passed down through generations, it tells a tale of 3 wizard brothers who encounter death and are each granted a powerful magical artifact: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. And what all 3 of these powerful items have in common is that they are able to perform extraordinary feats far beyond what is typically seen in the wizarding world. The Resurrection Stone is said to be able to bring the dead back to life. The Elder Wand has the ability to conquer all other wands, and the Invisibility Cloak is able to hide whatever or whomever is beneath it. Together, these items make up the Deathly Hallows, often represented by a symbol that includes all 3. And the story goes that these 3 items were crafted by Death himself. Given that Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus Peverell, the 3 brothers commonly associated with the story, were born in the late 11th, early 12th century, it would be reasonable to assume that the Hallows were also created in that same period. However, what's worth mentioning here is that the tale of the Hallows is just that, a tale, and I've made some videos in the past where I speculate that the origins of these 3 magical artifacts likely go back much further, maybe even 1,000 years. Creation of the TriWizard Tournament, 13th century. The TriWizard Tournament is a magical competition between 3 of the major wizarding schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang. For the tournament, each school selects a champion to compete in 3 dangerous tasks designed to test their magical abilities, intelligence, and bravery. The champions earn points based on their performance in each task, and the one with the highest score at the end wins all of the glory, as well as the historic TriWizard Cup. Just like most events from the early wizarding world, the exact origins of the TriWizard Tournament are all but lost to time, but based on a little bit of information we do possess from that era, we can safely deduce that the first contest occurred sometime around the end of the 13th century. At this time, the 3 major wizarding schools of the region came together and decided to pit their students against each other. And ever since the tournament began in the late 13th century, it plugged along, becoming a staple in the lives of many wizarding students throughout Europe and Britain. The 3 schools pledged to hold the event every 5 years, and for the most part, they stuck to that. But even though the tournament played such an important role in the history of magical education, you might be surprised to know that there aren't many records about the games, or even the champions from each tournament. Wizards' Council is formed, 13th century. It's pretty early on in the Harry Potter books that we're first introduced to the Ministry of Magic, the primary form of government in the magical world, at least in the UK. Like a Muggle government, the Ministry's responsibilities are vast, as they are the primary body that attempts to sustain law and order in the magical world. However, what some people may not know is that prior to the Ministry of Magic's existence, there was a governmental body called the Wizards' Council that governed Wizarding Britain. It was also the longest-serving form of government in magical history. However, the Wizards' Council also lacks structure, which meant that it was only a matter of time until their antiquated system would need to be reintroduced. Because of growing concerns surrounding wizard-muggle affairs and the introduction of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692, the wizarding community realized they would need a more structured government moving forward. Creation of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a phrase that gets thrown around quite a bit in the Harry Potter fandom. Sure, it's the name of the first book and film, but it's also known as the small crimson gem created by Nicolas Flamel, a French scribe born in the year 1330. One of the main functions of the Philosopher's Stone was to turn any metal into gold, which could have made anyone who held it in their possession very rich. But while that may sound impressive, that was only the stone's second most important capability. With a magical artifact like the Philosopher's Stone in your hands, you could have eternal life. Flamel, along with his wife Perenelle, were able to produce an elixir of life from the stone, allowing them to live ludicrously long lives. In fact, both of them would have been able to live forever, but Flamel, aware of the dangers of what could happen if the stone fell into the wrong hands, destroyed it. The best part about the Philosopher's Stone, it may even exist outside of Harry Potter. I did not invent the concept of the Philosopher's Stone, which is a legendary substance that was once believed to be real, and the true goal of alchemy. The properties of my Philosopher's Stone conform to most of the attributes the ancients ascribed to it. The stone was believed to turn base metals into gold, and also to produce the elixir of life, which could make you immortal. Genuine alchemists, the forerunners of chemists and physicists such as Sir Isaac Newton and the real Nicolas Flamel, sought, sometimes over lifetimes, to discover the secret of its creation. The Dementors are created. The dark wizard that went by the name Acristis is probably the most vile wizard that you've never heard of. A practitioner of the worst kinds of dark magic imaginable, Acristis walked the earth in the 15th century. No one knows where Acristis was originally from, but what we do know is that at one point in his life he decided to embark on a journey. And it was on this journey that Acristis eventually stumbled upon what we now know to be the island of Azkaban. At the time, the island had no infrastructure to speak of. It was a barren island. But it didn't take long for all of that to change, as Acristis decided that this was the perfect place to take his dark arts experiments to the next level. Hoping to keep the location of the island, which was located in the North Sea, a secret, Acristis kicked things off by placing concealment charms on the island, meaning that no one would be able to intentionally find it. Shortly thereafter, Acristis began his dark arts experiments by luring Muggle sailors to the island, then torturing and eventually murdering them. It has been said that before ever stepping foot on the island, Acristis was mad, but that after spending some time there, he became totally insane, completely losing touch with reality. He became so wrapped up and enthralled in his experimentation with dark magic that he had lost his mind, and the poor sailors that he lured to the island witnessed it firsthand. In his madness, it has been speculated that Acristis either unwittingly or perhaps intentionally created what we now know to be Dementors. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Even Muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory, will be sucked out of you. As for how he created the Dementors, well, that's still very much up for debate. However, if you want my opinion, you should check out my video, The Truth Behind How Dementors Are Created. It wasn't until Acristis died, and the concealment charms he had placed on the island had worn off, that the island, along with all of the Dementors on it, were discovered. Founding of Gringotts. Gringotts was founded in the year 1474 by a goblin who went by the name, you guessed it, Gringott. Little is known about the goblin Gringott and his formative years, or even how old he was when he founded the bank that would become the safest place for valuables in the wizarding world. What we do know is that he is featured on his own chocolate frog card, alongside the likes of famous witches and wizards such as Albus Dumbledore and Merlin. In a small way, this signifies the incredible accomplishment Gringott achieved by creating the first ever bank for magical society. The bank itself is located on the north side of the hidden locale, Diagon Alley, a street magically concealed from Muggles and only visited by those who are part of the wizarding world. Accessible via the wizarding pub, the Leaky Cauldron, Gringotts is one of the most frequented magical establishments within central London. Immediately noticeable to anyone who steps foot into Diagon Alley, Gringotts is taller than every other shop on the street, and has a brilliant white exterior with a set of bronze outer doors. Then, just inside the bronze exterior doors is a second set of inner doors, silver in material and colour, with the following words of warning engraved upon them. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there. Creation of the Wizen Gamut, 16th century. The Wizen Gamut is the highest court of law and parliament in the British wizarding world, serving as a combination of a Supreme Court and governing council. The court dates back to the 1500s, where it functioned within the Wizards' Council. Comprised of around 50 members who wear plum-coloured robes embroidered with a silver W when in session, the Wizen Gamut is responsible for handling major legal cases, including criminal trials, and acts as the final court of appeal. It also plays a legislative role, with the power to create and enforce laws within the wizarding community. The Wizen Gamut convenes within the Ministry of Magic, specifically in Courtroom 10, located in the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This courtroom is described as a large, dark, dungeon-like chamber with benches arranged in rows where Wizen Gamut members sit during trials. The court process is overseen by a presiding head known as the Chief Warlock of the Wizen Gamut, the group's highest-ranking member. The Chief Warlock ensures that judicial and legislative proceedings, including trials and debates, are conducted fairly and efficiently, at least in theory. Founding of Diagon Alley, 16th century. Nobody really knows the exact founding date of Diagon Alley. We know that Gringotts Wizarding Bank, located in Diagon Alley, was established in 1474, just a century after the famous economic crash that shook the wizarding world to its core. Therefore, it would make sense if Diagon Alley developed after the Goblins established such a massive financial centre. After all, Gringotts would eventually become one of the most important daily fixtures in the entire wizarding world of Britain, with hundreds of witches and wizards regularly visiting it. Establishing an apothecary or one shop nearby would have been a great way to catch customers who had galleons to spend. But others think that Diagon Alley got its start on the day the Leaky Cauldron opened its doors. After all, it's written within the pub's very address, number 1 Diagon Alley. The pub was established by Daisy Doddridge, its first landlady, in the early 1500s, with the purpose of serving as a gateway between the non-wizarding world and Diagon Alley. It features a bar, several private parlour rooms, and a spacious dining area. To muggles, the pub now appears as a dilapidated old shopfront on Charing Cross Road. However, this wasn't always the case. Before the Statute of Secrecy, muggle visitors were not turned away and were welcomed just as warmly as wizards. So I guess the true founding date of Diagon Alley really depends on how you define its establishment. Was Diagon Alley founded the day that the first pub opened its doors, or was it only truly Diagon Alley once it had been established as a proper shopping district? I suspect that the part of London that would eventually become Diagon Alley must have always been popular with local witches and wizards. Perhaps even then, when it was just a mud-filled street with a few cobblestone patches, Ollivanders' one shop and a few other magical vendors decided to plant their roots. However, I suspect that the area must have eventually become so well known amongst wizards that the goblins of the era decided to construct Gringotts Bank there, and then all of the other shops, which Harry and his friends knew so well, followed suit. Goblin Rebellion of 1612. It's no surprise that the wizarding and goblin communities have never seen eye to eye, both literally and figuratively. And so because of this, there have been numerous instances throughout history in which conflict broke out. One such conflict being the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. We're not quite certain about the exact location, but it seems that this armed conflict arose in or around Hogsmeade Village. Here, the goblin forces took an inn as their base, and ravaged the nearby buildings, setting many of them on fire. The exact number of lives laid down on both sides has been lost to the years, but the casualties were remarkably high, at least according to Hogwarts' 5th year History of Magic class. And when we look at the exact cause of this rebellion, there's no shortage of reasons for why the goblins would have started it. At a glance, the average goblin was far more important to the lives of wizards and witches around England. Goblins forged the most powerful weapons, indestructible armor, and through their natural propensity for hoarding gold, goblins basically kept the entire wizarding economy moving forward. And yet, witches and wizards looked down on them wherever they went. Not only that, they almost always refused to teach them the ways of wand lore, which meant that goblins had to accomplish their magical feats with the far more difficult and more dangerous technique of wandless magic. Even the highest court in Britain, the Wizen Gamut, refused to allow a goblin a seat. Without fair representation, it's likely that the goblins decided enough was enough, and went on a rampage in the year 1612. But unfortunately for the Goblin community, their rebellion only made matters worse. In response to the display of violence in Hogsmeade, the wizarding community of Britain convened and created a series of laws that restricted non-human magical creatures. The harshest among them was the new Code of Wand to Use, which the Wizards' Council passed less than 2 decades after the rebellion. This restricted wands to human wizards, and made it a crime for goblins, house elves, giants, and other non-humans to wield them. While human wizards simply hoarded wand lore in the centuries before, now it was actually illegal for goblins to study and possess wands. At a glance, you can see how this law made it almost impossible for goblins to defend themselves from wand-armed wizards and witches. But if you think about it more carefully, the restriction on wand ownership would completely hinder the ability of goblins to develop independent of the wizarding community, and meant that they would always depend on them. And this was really only the beginning. The first major wizarding war in the Harry Potter universe was a catastrophic period in wizarding history that lasted a whopping 11 years. The war started when Voldemort, obsessed with pure-blood supremacy, sought to overthrow the existing magical order and establish himself as the ruler of both the wizarding and non-magical worlds. The war officially ended on October 31st, 1981, when Voldemort's curse to kill the infant Harry Potter rebounded upon him, destroying his physical form and rendering him powerless. And the aftermath of this decade-long conflict left deep scars on the wizarding world. Families were torn apart, and many prominent witches and wizards lost their lives. The wizarding world was in shambles. But as far as the 7 books are concerned, the primary focus is on the Second Wizarding War, a conflict that only lasted 3 years. And to put it quite bluntly, the Second Wizarding War paled in comparison to the First War, which claimed many more lives and lasted much longer. It also has a much more complex history. The uncertainty of the war can best be summarized from the following quote. Imagine that Voldemort's powerful now. You don't know who his supporters are. You don't know who's working for him and who isn't. You know he can control people so that they do terrible things without being able to stop themselves. You're scared for yourself and your family and your friends. Every week, news comes of more deaths, more disappearances, more torturing. The Ministry of Magic's in disarray. They don't know what to do. They're trying to keep everything hidden from the Muggles, but meanwhile, Muggles are dying too. Terror everywhere. Panic, confusion. That's how it used to be. Join me today as we discuss every little detail about the First War, covering what we never got to read about in the books. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today we're going to be discussing in depth the First Wizarding War, a conflict that spanned 1970 through 1981. Before we get started, I just want to mention that only 30% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. One important thing to note right off the bat is that the First Wizarding War should not be confused with the Global Wizarding War, a conflict spanning 1910 to 1945 that was initiated by Grindelwald. The First Wizarding War only affected Wizarding Britain, and Grindelwald had nothing to do with it. The roots of the First Wizarding War can be traced back to Tom Riddle, also known as Lord Voldemort, who was pivotal in every aspect. After being discovered in Wall's orphanage, Tom Riddle was first introduced to the Wizarding world by Dumbledore. During their encounter, Tom received his official invitation to Hogwarts, and it was at this exact moment that a seed was planted, one that would later blossom into the dark legacy of Lord Voldemort. Upon his arrival at the school in 1938, Tom was unsurprisingly sorted into Slytherin House, and despite his dark nature, he had no issues forming connections. Tom may have lacked certain necessary human emotions, but that didn't mean he couldn't control people. His cunning and manipulative nature eventually meant that, in 1939, he would form a gang of sorts, a group consisting of his fellow Slytherin students. He had convinced these witches and wizards that he was their friend and gained their trust, but in reality, Riddle had no desire for friends and simply wanted to use them for his own selfish endeavors. The gang that Riddle formed was once described by Dumbledore, who worked at Hogwarts during this time, as a mixture of the weak seeking protection, the ambitious seeking glory, and the thuggish seeking a leader who could show them more refined cruelty. The gang's name at the time was the Knights of Walpurgis. The members, all from wealthy pureblood families, were involved in various unpleasant incidents during their school years. Despite this, Tom was careful never to be directly associated with any wrongdoing and was perceived as an exemplary student. He first became a prefect in 1942 during his 5th year, and then in 1944, during his 7th year, he became head boy. It was around this time that he eventually had to accept that his father was the Muggle and his mother the magical one. From then on, Riddle adopted the alias Lord Voldemort to avoid any reminder of his filthy Muggle father. At this stage, it was evident that Dumbledore was the only person who saw through Tom's manipulative charm. Because of this, Dumbledore closely monitored Tom, and their relationship actually plays a crucial role in the First Wizarding War. During his final year at Hogwarts in 1945, Voldemort witnessed Dumbledore's display of true power when he took action to help halt the global Wizarding War. Dumbledore dueled and defeated Grindelwald, imprisoning him in his own fortress, which finally brought an end to the global Wizarding War and ushered in a period of peace for the Wizarding world. However, Voldemort was aware that this peace would not last long, given the plans he had in mind. This defeat of Grindelwald by Dumbledore marks the intersection of the global Wizarding War with the First Wizarding War, which later connects to the Second Wizarding War when Voldemort sought out the Elder Wand and encountered Grindelwald in 1998. During his 6th year at Hogwarts, Tom Riddle discussed the theoretical possibility of creating 6 Horcruxes with Professor Slughorn, shocking the professor with his interest in dark magic. This act marked Riddle's continued descent into darkness and pursuit of immortality through dark and forbidden magic. And so, in June of 1942, Voldemort began his journey of Horcrux creation. In the same year, Tom Riddle killed Myrtle Warren in the Hogwarts bathroom, effectively creating his first Horcrux by placing a piece of his soul into his diary. Then, in August of 1943, Tom Riddle travelled to the town of Little Hangleton and killed his father. On this occasion, Tom used a ring previously owned by Marvolo Gaunt, his grandfather, to create his second Horcrux. Then, in 1945, Tom finally graduated from Hogwarts. Having finally completed his education, Riddle graduated and wasted no time in pursuing his next endeavour. Seizing the opportunity that presented itself with the retirement of Galatea Merrythought, Riddle swiftly applied for the vacant position of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts. Riddle saw this position not only as a chance to impart his knowledge of the dark arts, but also as a means to further establish his dominance within the wizarding community. However, Dumbledore, who had kept a watchful eye over Tom for a number of years, advised against hiring Riddle as a Hogwarts staff member. This resulted in Armando Dippet politely declining Riddle's application for the role, claiming that he was too young, but encouraged him to try again in the future. It was around the same time that Riddle became enthralled with the history of Hogwarts and its founders, particularly their relics. He used his cunning and charms to coerce the ghost of Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, and daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, to divulge the hiding place of her mother's diadem in a remote Albanian forest. Riddle then obtained the diadem and later killed an Albanian peasant, turning the object into his third Horcrux. When he returned to England, Riddle turned down several positions offered to him at the Ministry of Magic, opting instead to work at Borgin & Burke's in Knockturn Alley. It was here that he formed a one-sided fake friendship with Hepzibah Smith, a wealthy antiques collector, and used the opportunity to get hold of Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Riddle would later kill Hepzibah using poison and frame her house elf for the crime. He then resigned from his post at Borgin & Burke's and disappeared, using the murders of Hepzibah and a random muggle to create his fourth and fifth Horcruxes. At this point, Voldemort disappeared for nearly a decade, from 1961 to 1971. However, many other things happened during this period of time that would influence the war to come. In 1959, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew were born, followed by the births of James Potter, Remus Lupin, Lily Evans, and Severus Snape in 1960, individuals that would all later play significant roles in the First Wizarding War. In 1962, Nobby Leach became the Minister for Magic, the first Muggle-born to hold the position, causing controversy among older and pure-blood ministry workers. Many resigned in protest, leading to a divided and weakened ministry. Leach's tenure ended in 1968 when he fell ill, with Abraxas Malfoy, Draco Malfoy's grandfather, being suspected of poisoning him due to his Muggle-born status. Leach passed away soon after, further weakening the corrupt ministry. These events created an atmosphere of chaos and division, making it easier for Voldemort to exploit the situation after his return. While seemingly vanished between 1961 and 1971, Voldemort delved deep into the dark arts, studying obscure branches of magic and forging connections with loyal dark wizards. By the time 1970 had rolled around, Voldemort had completely abandoned the name Tom Riddle and had fully embraced the identity of Lord Voldemort. He instilled fear in the entire wizarding world, leading them to refer to him as He Who Must Not Be Named, or You-Know-Who, out of sheer terror. And upon his return, the first thing that Voldemort did was try again to become the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, hoping to recruit an army of students. Dumbledore, however, denied him the position. During his time away, Voldemort merged his former group, the Knights of Walpurgis, with newfound allies, rebranding them as the Death Eaters. And so, when Voldemort resurfaced in 1971, he had a large following of Death Eaters ready to carry out his plans of spreading terror and wreaking havoc. Voldemort conveyed to his Death Eaters that in order to establish a world of peace and dominance, the existing regime must be eradicated at any expense. Only individuals with pure blood and aligned ideals would be permitted to flourish in this new realm. As far as dark witches and wizards went, the Death Eaters were the worst. Their group was comprised of evil witches and wizards that were all hell-bent on pursuing their dark ambitions. They were the followers of Lord Voldemort, and they obeyed his every bidding in an effort to cleanse the wizarding world, the ultimate goal being to restore pure blood authority. And so, the First Wizarding War officially began around 1971. And in this same year, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Severus Snape, and Lily Evans all began their first year at Hogwarts. Snape swiftly befriended Slytherin students with an inclination towards dark magic and worshipping the new tyrant, Lord Voldemort. Meanwhile, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter formed a close friendship, while Snape found himself as their adversary due to incessant bullying by James and Sirius. These interactions would go on to shape their futures and decisions, unknowingly playing a significant role in the impending First Wizarding War. Because he was denied the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, Voldemort realized that he would need to amass an army through different means, and so between 1971 and 1973, he recruited various beings and creatures shunned by the wizarding world, including giants, werewolves, a significant number of Dementors, and acromantulas, among others. This coalition of outcast beings, alongside his Death Eaters, wreaked widespread destruction and chaos, marking the early years of the war in the early 1970s. This wizard, about 20 years ago now, started looking for followers. Got 'em too. Some were afraid, some just wanted a bit of his power, because he was getting himself power, alright. Dark days, Harry. With his army of dark creatures and wizards under his command, Voldemort initiated an attack on the British Ministry of Magic, aiming to topple it and establish a new world order run by purebloods. And to achieve his goals, the Death Eaters and their allies carried out attacks on Muggles, both for their own entertainment and to create chaos. These incidents consumed progressively more of the Ministry's time and attention as they attempted to heal survivors, search for the culprits, and prevent future attacks. And as things ramped up, Death Eaters began targeting Muggleborns and blood traitors, subjecting them to torture and sometimes death, instilling fear in wizarding society. The casting of the dark mark over the sites of their murders served to create further terror. They were truly dark times. In response to the growing army of Lord Voldemort and his followers, Albus Dumbledore recognized that he would need to create an army of his own, subsequently establishing the Order of the Phoenix in 1971. Despite the Ministry's official perspective of the Order as a rebel group, influential Ministry officials, including Elphias Doge, Daedalus Diggle, and Alistair Moody, swiftly joined. The purpose was to engage in covert and surprise attacks against the Dark Rebellion. Other members of the Order included Aberforth, Albus's younger brother, Mrs. Figg, a squib who cohabited the same street as the Dursleys in the future, Alice and Frank Longbottom, who were both Aurors, Mundungus Fletcher, Hagrid, and Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, Molly Weasley's brothers. Most members of the Order had met Dumbledore before and respected him, which encouraged them to join him in his fight and trust him with their lives. However, despite the Order's efforts, Voldemort's magical power and influence continued to expand, leading to more frequent and brutal attacks conducted by him and his Death Eaters. Hogwarts, however, emerged as a safe haven amidst the chaos, with Dumbledore serving as the only wizard capable of challenging Voldemort. He was the only man that Voldemort feared. At the same time, Death Eaters spread terror by marking murder scenes with the Dark Mark. They also kept their identities concealed to maintain secrecy within their ranks, introducing an element of confusion and paranoia to the wizarding community. As if that wasn't enough, Voldemort's use of the Imperius Curse heightened confusion and suspicion even further, leading friends and family to doubt one another. And all of the chaos happening at the Ministry of Magic certainly didn't help things. Then Minister Eugenia Jenkins had to address Squib riots in 1968, exacerbating the divide between pureblood supremacists and those with mixed heritage. And when Voldemort resurfaced in 1971, Jenkins faced chaos both within the wizarding world and the Ministry. Following her ineffective attempts to combat Voldemort over 4 years, she was ousted from office in 1975. Her successor, Minister Harold Mincham, took a strong stance against Voldemort, but faced protests from minority groups demanding equal treatment. This ignited tensions among elite pureblood families, feeling their traditions were in jeopardy, leading some pureblood supremacists to align with Voldemort's cause. It was also around this time that Bartemius Barty Crouch Sr., the Council of Magical Law head judge, rose quickly through the Ministry's ranks and became head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Together, Crouch and Mincham were able to make some headway with regards to the Death Eater threat, but they were only able to garner small victories in a much larger battle. In 1978, Severus Snape finally graduated from Hogwarts and subsequently aligned himself with the Death Eaters, joining former classmates like Evan Rosier, Lucius Malfoy, and Bellatrix Lestrange. At Snape's suggestion, Voldemort sought to recruit Lily Evans, a Muggle-born witch of exceptional talent, along with their close friends Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. But despite Voldemort's efforts, they all courageously refused to join his ranks. At least, that's how it looked. Following their defiance, James and Lily married and, alongside their friends, instead became members of the Order of the Phoenix. During the brutal war, the outnumbered Order faced many challenges, with Fabian and Gideon Pruitt being murdered, many Order members vanishing, and families of Order members becoming targets. Despite the losses, however, they continued fighting, and during this period, James and Lily Potter, as well as Alice and Frank Longbottom, defied Voldemort 3 times, a significant event contributing to the prophecy. Voldemort then focused his attention on a select group of his younger followers who possessed great magical abilities and unwavering loyalty. He took Severus Snape and Bellatrix Lestrange under his personal mentorship, imparting to them aspects of his secret knowledge of the dark arts. At this stage, Bellatrix developed a dangerous infatuation with Voldemort, bordering on obsession, something which he did not reciprocate. Voldemort also entrusted his diary Horcrux to Lucius Malfoy, intending to use it to open the Chamber of Secrets without directly targeting Hogwarts while Dumbledore remained headmaster. Severus Snape eventually became Voldemort's most trusted follower, even more so than Bellatrix. Despite this, Voldemort kept Snape unaware of its importance. In 1979, Regulus Black, younger brother of Sirius Black, completed his education at Hogwarts and joined the Death Eaters as well. And while he initially embraced pureblood supremacy, he later became disillusioned with the group's deranged leader and was horrified by the violent actions against Muggles. Around this time, Voldemort sought to test the defenses around his Horcruxes, and tasked Regulus's house elf Kreacher with this, callously leaving him to die. When Kreacher survived and returned home, Regulus realized that Voldemort had created a Horcrux and attempted to destroy it. This endeavor led to his violent death at the hands of the Inferi, but he managed to replace the locket with a counterfeit and entrusted the real Horcrux to Kreacher. In 1980, Minister Mincham was also removed from office due to his failure to end the war and was immediately replaced with Millicent Bagnold, and at this point the war entered its most desperate phase. Death Eaters began ruthlessly targeting and murdering members of the Order. Marlene McKinnon and her family were killed by Travers, Knott, and Mulciber, while Edgar Burns and his family fell victim to Thorfinn Rowell and Fenrir Greyback. Gideon and Fabian Pruitt were slain by Antonin Dolohov, and Dorcas Meadows, Caradoc Dearborn, and Benji Fenwick also met tragic fates at the hands of Voldemort and his followers. These losses marked a grim escalation in the conflict. In response to this, Barty Crouch Sr. finally authorized Ministry auras to use lethal force and unforgivable curses. Alistair Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Frank and Alice Longbottom spearheaded a successful Ministry campaign against the Death Eaters, focusing on battling giants and apprehending supporters of Voldemort. Alistair Moody's capture of Igor Karkaroff and other Dark Lord sympathizers, along with the imprisonment of Antonin Dolohov and Corbin Yaxley, marked significant victories. Despite these successes, Voldemort remained beyond reach due to his elusiveness and unmatched power, with Dumbledore being the only one capable of confronting him. Despite the ongoing war, life continued for those who had not yet been directly impacted by it. Led by Dumbledore, Hogwarts remained a stronghold of top-tier magical education and remained untouched by the Death Eaters. It was speculated that marriages and births increased significantly during this time of uncertainty, the result of couples marrying early due to the war's unpredictability. In late July of 1980, James and Lily Potter had a son, Harry Potter, while Frank and Alice Longbottom welcomed their son, Neville Longbottom. Cue the prophecy. The prophecy, of course, refers to the prediction foretold by Sybil Trelawney in the year 1980. In this same year, Trelawney found herself in the Hogsmeade pub with Dumbledore, interviewing for her post as professor. During her interview, a disappointed and unimpressed Dumbledore began to lose interest, when suddenly Sybil entered into a trance. In her trance-like state, Sybil spoke of the famous prophecy that we all know, explaining that Voldemort would be defeated. It spoke of a boy that would be born at the end of July, that possessed the power to defeat the Dark Lord himself. What Dumbledore and Sybil did not know, however, was that Snape, who was then a Death Eater, was eavesdropping at the door. This simple fact immediately placed Sybil in great danger from Voldemort, and, in an effort to protect her, Dumbledore hired her for the position at Hogwarts. The prophecy is as follows. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. What's interesting about Snape eavesdropping is that he did not hear the prophecy in its entirety, and only told Voldemort what he remembered. Because of this, he missed out very important details, like the fact that Harry would be marked as his equal, and that he would possess unknown power. Snape also almost immediately regretted his decision to tell Voldemort, as he quickly realized that it would place the life of Lily Evans, the only girl he ever loved, in jeopardy. With the information that had been provided to him by Snape, Voldemort came to the conclusion that Harry Potter was the boy that the prophecy was talking about. Lily and James Potter were some of Dumbledore's most powerful supporters and integral members of the Order of the Phoenix, which meant that Voldemort already had them on its radar. The only other option for a child that posed this threat to him was Neville Longbottom, who was born on the 30th of July, but Voldemort firmly believed that it was Harry. However, Snape, upon realizing that Voldemort was going to be targeting Lily and her family, sought Dumbledore's help to protect them. Despite some initial reluctance to help Snape, a current Death Eater, Dumbledore eventually agreed to help hide them. And so the Potter family went into hiding, utilizing the Fidelius charm and a designated secret keeper to keep their location hidden. Initially, Dumbledore offered to be their secret keeper, ensuring only himself and a select few could locate the Potters. However, James and Lily chose Sirius as their secret keeper, eventually switching to Peter Pettigrew in secret due to suspicions within their group. Tragically, Pettigrew betrayed them to Voldemort, leading to the devastating events that followed. This brings us to Voldemort's next move. Partially driven by ignorance and partially by foolishness, Voldemort believed that he would be able to circumvent the prophecy by murdering Harry. And so on Wednesday, October 31st, Voldemort travelled to the town of Godric's Hollow where the Potter family lived. It was here that Voldemort, in an attempt to murder Harry, ended up murdering James and Lily. After entering their home, Voldemort first killed James Potter before turning his attention to Lily and baby Harry. As he approached Lily, he requested her to step aside and let him have Harry, partly in consideration of Snape's wishes. Voldemort promised to spare Lily's life if she complied, but her unwavering priority was to protect Harry. Because she would not get out of the way, she was murdered by Voldemort's killing curse. Next, Voldemort turned his wand on Harry. He knew that he was moments away from killing the only boy or wizard that was a threat to him and his regime. However, what would happen next is something that he never could have predicted, as after firing a killing curse at Harry, his curse rebounded back at him, the result of a loving sacrifice that Lily had made. When the curse came back at him, it destroyed him, and it marked the end of Voldemort, at least for a little while. Despite the destruction of Voldemort's body and magic, he did not perish due to his Horcruxes, which allowed him to survive in a weakened, bodiless form. Fearing his vulnerability, he hastily fled the collapsing house and the country, refusing to be seen by anyone, including his Death Eaters. On that night, word of Voldemort's defeat and supposed demise quickly spread across Great Britain, sparking widespread jubilant celebrations that led to multiple breaches of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. Minister Bagnold justified the exuberant gatherings as the wizarding community's inalienable right to party. This date, October 31st, marked the end of the First Wizarding War, secured Harry's reputation as the boy who lived, and marked the point at which Snape's allegiance completely shifted. This was a prominent date in history as it allowed the wizarding world, at least for a time, to get back to normal. During the First Wizarding War, Voldemort really peaked in terms of power. Sure, he was able to secure followers and get his body back in the Second War, but in the First War, he really had a strong, secure, confident grasp on the wizarding world. He knew that he was in control, and everyone else knew it too. That is what makes this date so important, as if the events of this day didn't occur, Voldemort's rule over the wizarding world may have just lasted forever. However, the defeat of Voldemort didn't mean that it was all over. There were still a lot of loose ends that needed to be dealt with, namely the capturing of the Death Eaters. Death Eaters like Travers, Mulciber, and 3 accomplices in the Bones family murder were captured and imprisoned. Thorfinn Rao, Gibbon, Selwyn, and Jugson were convicted and sent to Azkaban. Igor Karkaroff betrayed Augustus Rookwood. Fenrir Greyback and other werewolves went into hiding, while the last remaining giants resettled in rural Denmark, and Severus Snape, who had defected towards the end of the war, was vouched for by Dumbledore and instated as a professor at Hogwarts. But despite these efforts, many Death Eaters still managed to evade punishment, using a variety of excuses and resources to avoid facing consequences for their crimes. One of the biggest ones was the claim that they were acting under the Imperius Curse. Although Lucius Malfoy, Nott, Avery, the Carrow siblings, Crabbe Goyle, and Corbin Yaxley faced legal action, they were eventually cleared of wrongdoing. But while Voldemort was gone, his cause did live on to some extent, and not all Death Eaters had given up. Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus Lestrange, Rabastan Lestrange, and Bartemius Barty Crouch Jr. being the best examples of this. This group would eventually go on to abduct and torture Frank and Alice Longbottom in an attempt to extract information on Voldemort's whereabouts. The torture was so severe that the Longbottoms were left mentally insane and had to be cared for at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. This left their son, Neville, entrusted to the care of his grandmother. The heinous attack incited widespread anger and was considered one of the most horrifying crimes ever committed. Alistair Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt led a team of Aurors in capturing the entire Lestrange family and Crouch Jr. They were brought to trial, where Barty Crouch Sr., ashamed of his son's involvement, sentenced them all to life in Azkaban. At this stage, Bellatrix defiantly expressed her loyalty to the Dark Lord, proclaiming that he would return to save her and her family as they were taken away by Dementors. After being stripped of most of his magical abilities, a defeated Voldemort sought refuge in Albania, haunting the remote forest where he had previously ventured. Desperate to regain a physical form, he attempted to possess the bodies of animals, particularly snakes, though this only resulted in their premature demise due to their inability to withstand his magical powers. Unable to venture out and possess humans due to the ongoing search by Aurors, Voldemort waited, hoping that one of his faithful followers would find him and restore him to power, unaware that many of his loyal followers had been imprisoned or killed. With the dark forces that had terrorized the wizarding world for years now vanquished, the survivors of the war began the task of rebuilding. However, the lingering presence of Lord Voldemort, who had surpassed Grindelwald as the most formidable dark wizard, continued to cast a shadow of fear. Even a decade after his downfall, the mere mention of his name instilled terror. The belief in his possible survival persisted, with opinions ranging from him being dead, laying in wait for the opportune moment to resurface, to being horribly weakened and half dead. It was the end of Voldemort, for now. And that's it for this video. Which piece of Harry Potter history was news to you? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.